Joining us now, NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, former New York Assistant Attorney General Adam Pollack, and NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. Everybody, welcome. Lisa, let's talk about knocking down this bond. It's a really big deal. Clearly what Donald Trump was hoping would happen.
Absolutely what he was hoping would happen. And assuming, Katie, that he posts this bond within the next 10 days, it will prevent the Attorney General from taking any enforcement efforts. But I want to make one thing really clear. While we are talking about this as a major victory for the former president, we are still talking about posting a bond of $175 million. That's a gargantuan sum by any measure. It's only a small sum and a major victory where we're talking about the former president having a $454 million judgment and counting against him.
Tom, what do you think of this?
Well, I think we were speaking earlier today. I mean, there's a couple things that are on the table here. One, it does provide them some wiggle room and some time. And they said they were not able to get to a point where they could get this bond in the first place. Now the question becomes, OK, you couldn't get to that. Could you get to this? We've looked at the former president's financials, even some of his more recent filings. He does have millions of dollars in what we would call liquid assets, the type of things that can be sold here. It's 3:02 Eastern time. He's got 58 more minutes to sell today, stocks, treasuries, things like that. So these are the types of things that he could move and he does have access to. We know that from his financial filings, and we've seen consistency with that over the years since he started running back even to 2016. But when you go back to that time period, he raised an idea today to our colleague Garrett Haake that he wants to keep as much cash as possible pending his run here for presidency. You know very well, Katie, from covering him back then, he said, well, I'm going to self-fund his entire candidacy, and that turned out not to be the case. And it didn't turn out to be the case in 2020, and it doesn't appear to be the case so far in this election cycle. So what does he actually want to do with that cash? What access does he have? And if he needs to start to sell assets, he's selling them, as we've touched on a little bit before, into a difficult environment.
Could he potentially raise this amount of money from his super PACs and whatnot? I mean, the Trump legal super PAC has paid $50 million so far, I think last year alone, in legal fees. Could he try to raise this in campaign funds?
Katie, I don't think so. I think that the judgment bond would need to come from his personal assets or from his business assets. It's still a substantial bond to raise, but much more manageable now, $175 million instead of $500 million.
Is it easier to get a bond company to put up that sort of money?
Look, his lawyers went to the appellate court and said, we talked to 30 bond companies and none of them would bond this appeal. There was a line missing. Every one of them would bond the appeal if he had $500 million of liquid assets. Apparently he didn't. That's why 0 for 30. Now I think it's easier. If he comes with $175 million, 30 out of 30 will line up and grant the bond.
An interesting wrinkle today, Brian, is that Donald Trump's Truth Social is going public, and he stands to make a lot of money off that. Explain it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this stems from a setup that was already put in place years ago with a blank check company called Digital World Acquisition Corporation, which had announced an intention a few years ago to acquire Trump's media company, which included Truth Social. Now, there were a number of hiccups. There were some investigations, which is the reason why that's only consummating right now. But that could stand to net him about $3 billion in net worth. But here's the thing. Tom brought up the point of liquidity, right? They have to be liquid assets. And yes, even though he might make about $3 billion in terms of wealth from holding those securities, he cannot sell them instantly because in the agreement from the merger, he can't sell them within the 6 months. So that's important to note.
Negotiate that, though, within the terms of the merger. He owns so much of it. Might he be able to get out of that that constraint if he asks?
Yeah, well, I mean, once the company is officially created and then trades on the stock exchange, which will be tomorrow, there could be some movement among the board of directors, which he has appointed, to vote in favor of changing the bylaws to allow him to sell the securities. But I want to point out that even if that does happen, that could potentially open him up to a shareholder lawsuit, because let's say, for example, they do change the bylaws, he sells and dumps a bunch of stock, and then the stock price tanks. Well, if the shareholders say, well, that wasn't very much in the interest of the shareholders, maybe that opens him to some legal liability. Well, it will be his son, in addition to some of his cabinet members, like Linda McMahon.
Interesting. All right, Ben, I know you have thoughts on the Truth Social stuff and the value.
I think that the value is essentially worthless. This is a company that doesn't make any money. And sure, they could change the bylaws and end the lockup period and go to market and sell a share. Someone will buy a share, 2 shares. But if they went to market and tried to sell $3 billion, the value of the stock would go to zero practically immediately.
Let me ask about what this means for the appeal on the judgment itself. Was this a blow to the Attorney General? I mean, she went in, she did calculations. That's how she came up with the $464 million number. Judge Engoron validated that with his own calculations. What does it say to you to have the appeals court knock this down to 175?
And also expert witness calculations.
Yeah.
But it certainly suggests that the appellate court is concerned with the size of the judgment. Maybe not that there is a judgment, but concerned with the size of the judgment and maybe previewing knocking it down in size. That said, the Attorney General's office has the best appellate lawyers in New York City, and I'm confident that they'll put up a fight.
Let me just ask you, because when we were talking about this initially, it was such a large judgment. It was everything that Letitia James wanted and potentially more. Because so many of the companies claimed that they weren't actually victimized here. They didn't feel any harm. Does that make it so that the appeals court would they take that into account? Would they say, listen, it was bad what he did. He should not have done it. This is not okay in business. But because nobody was hurt financially in terms of the banks, we don't think it should be this high.
Look, I think that factors into any human being's evaluation, judgment, and judges are judges. That's what they're paid to do. So I think that must factor into some degree, but he had ill-gotten gains, and ill-gotten gains are a concept under the law, and that's what the judge in the lower court, Justice Engoron, found, and I think that'll also play into the appellate decision.
Lisa, I know you and I have been back and forth on this. What are your thoughts?
I think, first of all, I think in setting the bond today at $175 million, that's certainly an indication that at least 5 judges on the appellate division believe that the judgment is too large. If not, they would insist on having Tish James and her office securitized for the value of what they think the judgment ultimately should be. If an appeals court ultimately sustains that judgment for $454 million and counting, because prejudgment interest will continue to accrue, you can see how $175 million in a bond isn't enough to provide Tish James with that security. So there is some inkling of where this is going in there. That having been said, one of the things that you could criticize the judgment for was sort of taking it on both ends, right? Part of the judgment comes from saying that Trump got loans at values that wouldn't have been available to anybody else in the market. And at the same time, when he sold certain of the assets for which he had gotten loans, he also improperly got profits from them. It may be that some judge on the appellate division says to themselves, well, wait a second, you can punish him at the front end or at the back end, but on the same deal, you can't punish him for both.
Tom, how has the AG reacted to this today?
They've put a statement out saying, look, the judgment is still the judgment, and effectively this case goes forward. And obviously they're certainly confident with their case. They were able to win it. As far as the legal analysis of it, and we're looking at the statement that she put out there, that this whole judgment stands. It's just an issue of the bond being decreased. That's what she's pointing to. Look, this is going to be argued. It's going to be months more. I mean, it's quite possible this won't be decided until about a year from now, perhaps a little bit shorter of a period of time than that. I'm curious, actually, if Trump can pledge his shares without having to sell them, if that's a workaround for him potentially that he could do here. You run the risk, if you're the bond company, not for Donald Trump, but if you're the bond company, running the risk of the price of those shares coming down. But that is a potential option here that he could do.
Yeah, I was going to say, I took a look at the lockup agreement that said he can't sell for 6 months, and it also says that you can't lend, offer, pledge, hypothecate, encumber, donate, assign, sell, or contract to sell any of that. So it does sound like it covers that.
Hey, everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.